Okay, so just to be perfectly clear, I wasn't paid in any way for this video. This is just a couple of tile guys talking. It's not a sponsored video. I just want to be perfectly clear about that. So hope you enjoy the conversation that we had. So you know this guy? You've probably seen him in some videos. I'm just about to have a conversation with him. Back with Bryant from the Schluter Education Department, and we've been talking about floor installations, and we decided to get together and see if we can talk about our own personal histories of how we started and what we use for substrates for our tile installations. Mm-hmm. So why don't you start off? How did you start installing tile on floors in particular?
Yeah, and I think it's good, Sal, because as we said in a couple of the other videos that we've done, our time frame of getting into the industry is about the same, right? Didn't you say?
Yeah, around 1984 for me, and you were right around that time too.
Yeah,
so we have a very similar time frame and background as to how we started to install tile.
Yeah, I'll start off. Substrates, especially if we go back before 1960, for tile contractors, they really developed their own substrate with mud, a mortar bed.
Yeah, I actually used to do mud floors myself. I
was gonna bring that up first, and that was the only way to do tile prior to 1960, let's say, and that's before we got in the industry. And like I said, for me, it was shower floors. I would do a pre-slope, then we would do a vinyl pan liner, like we talked about in the last session with showers.
Yeah.
But again, a little bit of floor. So I just wanted to hear your experience.
Back when I started, I was taught how to do, float mud floors. I never really did floated shower floors. That was kind of already dead when I started. Shower walls. But I did float a lot of bathroom floors and sometimes some even kitchen floors. The biggest mud job I ever did was like 900 square feet. The last shower bathroom floor I did was probably about 7-8 years ago that I actually put in a mud floor because the bathroom was so out of whack and was just the only way to do it. But I'm too old for that stuff now. The only thing I actually still do is for mud is my shower pans. That's it. Yeah. But mud was very common. So people, just in case people don't know what mud is, it's basically sand and cement mixed to a ratio of 4-to-1 or 5-to-1, and then you screed it out and float and make a flat surface. We don't have to go into the details.
No, it's good. It's good because we, sometimes it's called dry pack because we don't add much water to it.
Yeah.
And the description I've heard and I like is where it's just wet enough where you could create a ball.
A ball. Yeah, exactly.
Like a sandcastle, that just wet enough to mold.
Yeah.
But not wet like concrete. How concrete comes out of a truck.
And then when you went over plywood or you went over these plank floorings, it would be an unbonded.
Yeah.
A mud floor, you'd have a slip sheet, the wire lath, and then the way we did it here, slip sheet, wire lath, and then you put your mud on top. And those were great systems, but a lot of work. A lot of work.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment because, our industry was starting to change. If I mention this again, 1960, Thinset comes along and the whole building industry was looking for thinner, lighter, and faster ways of doing things. Yeah. And that
Thinset is actually more a system than it is actually the mortar.
Right. Yeah. So everything, our whole industry and the building industry really was putting a crimp on how we would do things. So there was a couple things. One, a lot of the building industry and the builders didn't want us to do mud or float mortar beds. And number two, they wanted something thinner. I mean, you started talking about plywood. And
okay, so yeah, back then, right? The most prevalent type of substrate. And and if you look at the TCNA handbook, there's still a method for tiling over plywood in the method, in the TCNA handbook, but it's probably not something you really want to do. So, but anyway, that was a prevalent substrate for my area where I work, right? That you would put down. So if you had a 3/4 inch subfloor, then you put another 1/2 inch on top, maybe 3/8, whatever, right? And then you tile directly on top of that. And then everything was dependent on the Thinset to be the proper type and the flexibility in the Thinset for the tile not to crack, and which is really a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, my experience with plywood, I was thinking about this before we were chatting today. And, I did a lot of work for a local retailer, and there was also a lumber yard that would sell tile products, and they would call me and say, hey, do you have time to squeeze this job in? And I remember this one project, and the lumber yard said, you're all set, just go in and do the tile. I finished up the tile one afternoon, and later that evening, the customer called me and said, there are a few tiles that are buckled or up in the air.
We use 1/4 inch.
You know what it was, Sal? They had put down a plywood that was not exterior grade.
Delaminating.
Oh yeah. And you know where it delaminated? Right on the seams.
Yeah.
Right at the edge. So when the wet Thinset fell in there, and it was just like the cartoon character that gets hit in the head and has a big lump. I couldn't believe it. So I had maybe a dozen tiles like that where I had to remove those tiles that were well stuck but lifted, and then cut that plywood. But it was a valuable lesson because you see, somebody else did the work. And when I looked at the plywood, it looked like plywood. It looked like plywood. It looked like plywood.
Yeah.
So I didn't think twice.
You didn't bother to read, or you didn't know to read the stamp, what the grade was stamped on it. Yeah.
I also remember some way or somehow we found out that the tile council would say back then it was 1/2 inch. They didn't even, they didn't even say 3/8. And so whenever we would do it, we would put
1/2 inch. Yeah. And then specifically they would say to leave a gap, the nailing schedule, et cetera, et cetera. And even today, if you're going to use plywood, you have to adhere rigorously to the instructions on how to install plywood if you're going to put tile over plywood, which I don't think is actually a very good idea.
Well, I got a good story to that about leaving the gap. So my father was helping my wife and I. We were building our first house, a little raised ranch, and my dad was helping us as much as he could. And we were putting in the top layer, the underlayment, the second layer of 1/2 inch plywood. And, we were thinking like finish carpenter. So everything,
cut it up.
Oh my gosh. We thought it looks great. It's going to be covered by tile, but we thought, hey, we're good carpenters, right? Well, I don't really remember if it was the next year or 2 years later or 3 years later, but and this is also a telltale sign that it was back in the 80s. The tiles were 8 inch by 8 inch ceramic.
Remember those, right?
We didn't even have 12 by 12s unless we went to marble or granite. And guess what? I had 3 tiles that had a crack. It was a straight line.
Yeah, right along the seam.
Totally. I pulled up those tile. There's the plywood that we had butted tight.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking now, if each sheet even grew just a 16th, you can only go one way, which is
up. Yeah, it swell, and with change in temperature and moisture in the house, right? It swell and peak and cause cracks. And then a lot of times you would go into a house, they've got a kitchen floor or whatever, and they say we need to change this floor, but we don't want these cracks anymore. And you go and you see like every 8 feet and every 4 feet it was a straight line, and you could tell where each individual sheet of plywood was. So
then of course we've always had concrete, and one of our presenters, I like what he says, there's crack concrete.
Yeah, 2 kinds of concrete.
Yeah. Go ahead, say it.
2 kinds of concrete that's cracked and concrete that's gonna crack.
Right. So you probably looked at concrete the same way I did. When you're working on wood frame construction, there's deflection and and there's expansion, contraction, because it's wood, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Humidity, moisture. But I always viewed concrete as very solid.
And because I did a ton of tile over concrete, not as often as plywood. You know, you do a basement, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like concrete, the best substrate you can have to go over.
Yeah.
But in reality, I think concrete moves at like 1.6 times the rate of an average tile. It's almost twice the rate of an average tile. So
sure.
there's a differential in expansion and contraction right there.
Cracks develop, you know, later on sometimes.
They can develop decades later.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I use as an analogy, you know, when I'm speaking to attendees at a workshop, is that, you know, tile is a veneer. We don't build a house with tile. We don't, you know, build a basement floor with tile. You know, we're sticking tile to structure. And so I mentioned how in our area, sometimes a family can't afford to finish the basement right away. And what they do up here is they'll paint the concrete just to keep the dust down, you know. And I'll ask the audience, you know, if the concrete cracks, what happens to the paint? Well, it will crack. And I'll say tile is a veneer, so it can't hold back the movement of the concrete. So if the concrete's going to move, the tile's got to go with it.
Yeah, because it's bonded together.
Yeah,
right.
It's part of it.
It's stuck together, so it's basically one surface. So if it cracks, it's going to crack. We'll talk about uncoupling a little bit later, right?
But uncoupling used to be a method, and you mentioned it, the slip sheet of the membrane for your mortar bed.
Yeah.
And even thousands of years before was the tamp sand.
Yeah.
And what's really cool, Sal, is that I've had a few people in a workshop that moved here from, I think there was a father and son, and they had moved here 2 years ago from Syria, you know, in the Middle East. And they said, we still do tile.
Oh, they still use that method, huh?
Tamp sand method.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you think it was a lost method, but you know, I guess any way you go in the world, sometimes you can find something that's still being used from centuries ago.
Well, it's a proven method, like we see in you know, back in Europe in the cathedrals where these floors have lasted. You know, when we say a lifetime, does that mean 100 years?
No, that's longer than they've lasted generations.
Generations, many lifetimes. Yeah. So we've got, you know, that old method of the tamp sand, which in some parts of the world is still being done. Of course, the mortar bed, which, you know, I used to cover New York City as part of my territory, and there's places where they still float mud.
Yeah, there's still what. Yeah, I mean, I would still float the occasional bathroom floor if I didn't want to do the work. I'm too old for that. I got enough aches and pains. But it's still a viable method. But then again, you got to consider all the weight, weight that, you know.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Sal, because there are a lot of times we can say, oh, we can do that, but we do have to take into consideration what additional weight, especially on, for sure, stick frame construction.
Yeah.
Because people will say, hey, can I tile on tile? Right?
Yeah. Well, you can, but you got to make sure, because you can tile on tile, but the new tile you put on top is only going to be as good as the tile that's underneath.
And I do worry about the weight. And if somebody's going with a 1/2-inch marble on top of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is another cementitious product besides concrete, and that's a gypsum pour.
Oh, yeah.
I used to call it Gypcrete every time I saw that, but that's one brand.
Yeah.
I can remember 2 projects locally here that I had to tile over that type of pour was done. Now, one, I remember I was impressed by the product. So maybe the company that poured it was good because it was just as flat. That went really well. But then I worked in a house where they did the same thing. They poured to bury the hydronic tubes. And I discovered that gypsum screed was very chalky and weak.
Yeah. I guess, you know, anything you do, right? It depends on the quality and the experience of the person person doing it, right? Because you can screw anything up if you want, you know.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of different ways to do things, and some are better than others. But if you're doing them all correctly, they'll all work.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. But then some things require more attention to detail.
Yeah, some are easier to screw up.
Right. Because there could be more risk involved with going over certain substrates.
Yeah, like plywood would be one of those substrates, right? If you don't do it correctly, you're going to get those hairline cracks. I mean, you can install tile on plywood, and I've done it many, many, many times over the years, but today I won't do it, right? Because there's a certain amount of risk involved in doing it, and you just got to make sure you cross all your T's and dot all your I's. So, and there are better ways today than.
So you started to bring up one other product, and CBU, or cement board,
cementitious backer unit, CBU.
Right. Yeah. So commonly known as cement board, and
there's two types of cement boards.
Go ahead.
There's cement. There's the true cement board, and then there's fiber cement board.
And fiber cement board.
Yeah. So like a durock would be like a cement board, and like a hardy backer would be like a fiber cement board, and they are not equal.
Right. So my experience with it, because again, there was a local lumber yard here, and they brought in a lot of drywall and joint compound, which was from U.S.A. And guess what they made? Durock.
Oh yeah, Durock. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the one that was available here, because I'm sure the lumberyard got a good price on buying everything that.
Yeah. Well, that's the company they dealt with.
Yeah. So that's what we were exposed to when we started using a cement board, was Durock. So that's the experience I have.
Yeah. And then you got to, even when you're doing Durock, it's, you still have to install it the proper way, because just because it's a cement board doesn't mean you can just throw it down.
Yeah, I looked up Durock and noticed that it first came out in 1984, so almost at the time we started.
Yeah, and in fact, that was a transitional, kind of like a transitional period, like maybe 10 years, where you're going from like a plywood subfloor or mud, and then this newfangled material came out, and you did one, and then maybe you did a few more, and then by like 10 years down the road, you pretty much moved away from plywood and you were doing all cement board.
Yeah. And it kind of made sense, because now we got Thinset mortar, and you think Thinset bonding to cement would be better than to plywood.
Yeah.
They just, I know they made Thinsets that stick to plywood, but I also thought, no, I think it's always better cement to cement.
Yeah. And you got to remember too, that when you put down cement board, and a lot of people don't do this, and it's a big no-no, is you've got to have to put a leveling bed of Thinset under the cement board, and you can't skip that, right? But a lot of people think they'll use liquid nails, or they'll use
or nothing at all.
Oh, nothing at all, and they'll just screw it down and say, oh, we put a lot of screws in it. But that is not, it's, and then all you have to do is just read the directions. You know what I mean? It doesn't say you can skip the Thinset, right? It gives you the notch trowel. And then a lot of times people will do is they don't tape the seams, right? And that's a big mistake too, because now if you've got, you got 30 sheets of a cement board, right? And you don't tape the seams. Now you've got 30 sheets that move independently, right? Whereas when you tape the seams, now you got one complete monolithic plane, and that's what you're supposed to do. But why read directions? But what I always tell people? I always tell people, if you're going to do something, do it the right way. So that either means the TCNA handbook, right, or manufacturer's instructions, right? There's no other like in between.
Right. So why don't we touch on I think it's the last substrate or underlayment, let's say. I think I'd have you start this section. And, we went through the mud job, the mortar bed, plywood, which we did a lot of, concrete board, we did a lot of,
gypsum.
Yeah, going over concrete, gypsum.
Yeah.
So what's our
Well, the
last?
latest and probably the best product out there is uncoupling, right? You guys were the first with uncoupling. You had the one with the straight lines, and then you have the squares. When anyone thinks of uncoupling, what comes to mind? Ditra, right? Because that was the first, and it's the most popular, I would think, right? And what does that do? We remember we were at the Mohegan Sun. We had that. What was it, Joey?
Oh yeah, that little model.
So and that actually shows how you can stick a tile to a floor without actually sticking the tile to the floor. In other words, it's just mechanically attached, and that's the beauty of uncoupling, because you have the floor attached to the floor to the substrate, and the what's underneath can move independently of the tile. And if there's like a little excessive movement, and it won't transfer through to the tile, and you don't get those cracks that you would see plywood or other substrates which are not done correctly.
I think there's two things. There's the free space, the open space, which
so that the Ditra can deform.
Yep. It's absorbing, this stuff going on that substrates like to do.
Yeah.
And secondly, that little model that we did, that almost showed how the surface of the Ditra, since it's plastic, for lack of better words, the mortar is mechanically locked.
Yeah.
But that plastic acts like a slip sheet for that Thinset that's bonded to the tile.
Yeah, exactly. And so
like a modern day,
modern
day slip sheet.
I should run out to my truck and get that.
I just want to talk about you and I when we got exposed to it, and what did we think of it when we saw
so here's I'm going to tell you exactly when I got exposed to it, when I really started to use it. I think it was back in around 2000, almost 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, right? Which I knew about Ditra, and but it wasn't something that I used a lot, right? Because, everyone has their ways. But then one day we had two 900 square foot tile jobs to do on the 5th floor.
Oh, I see where this
is. Not carrying up 20 by 20 tile, if I remember correctly. And I'm not carrying up 900 square feet of backer board up to the 5th floor. So this is when Ditra, really looking into different alternatives, and carrying up a roll of Ditra. I think we needed three rolls, three rolls, right? Yeah. 3 rolls is better than bringing up 20 million
66 sheets of cement board, I think.
Yeah. So that was, and then once you use it and then you find out just how it works, it's like, well, this is what we're doing all the time.
I think I used Ditra for the first time, like it was probably 1994. It didn't take me long to go, hey, I'm using this.
Once you come across something that works and it makes your life easier, and it doesn't break your back.
Hey, Sal, the other thing was the local dealer here, they wanted to hire me to do more tile. Well, you can only do so much. And when you spend X amount of time putting down, say, backer board, well, all of a sudden there's Ditra, and my underlayment is shortened at least by half.
Yeah. Well, more than by half. Yeah. How long, if you've got to put down 100 square feet of Ditra, right? How long is that really going to take you?
Oh, no time at all, really.
If you're going to put down 100 square feet of backer board, how long is that going to take you? Most of the day.
What happened was the store was happy because I was spending less time on underlayment.
Yeah, and more time on installing tile.
Yeah. So, in a month, I might be able to do 1 or 2 more jobs for them, and they were ecstatic about that. So.
And then and the other thing is, it was a better job.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's no matter how well you do stuff, right? One thing might be a little bit more forgiving than another thing, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the uncoupling membrane is going to be more forgiving than a backer board or plywood. If there's a little movement in backer board and plywood, that's a bonded. That's what they call it, a force conductive assembly, right?
There you go. Good words. Force conductive assembly.
Whereas Ditra is a non-conductive assembly. So
it puts the assembly in a relaxed state.
Yeah. So there you go. So one is gonna let you sleep at night a little easier than the other. right? So why not use modern products that work?
Well, before we end this session, can I put in a little plug in for our webinars?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So
that's enough.
Just kidding. So the reason I wanted to bring it up, Sal, is they're about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and people can sign in, and we usually do a couple a day, and they're on all topics like uncoupling, waterproof.
Yeah, and it's easier to find an hour and a half than it is to find 2 days to go to a workshop.
Well, that's it. And I think the workshops are great if you can do that.
Yeah, and I highly recommend the workshops, because if you go, I've been to, like, I don't know, a dozen, no, maybe not a dozen, but at least 7 of them, at the very least, right? Yep. And I learn something every time.
And what's fun for us, Sal, is even though we're, quote, the instructors, we learn from you guys, from everybody that's in the audience. We're learning too.
Yeah, of course.
And that's the best thing, is that if we can all share great ideas and increase this awesome industry that we're in, that's a win-win.
So why don't we just wrap it up and check out, Schluter has a great YouTube site. If you need to know something, about installing their products, you guys have great videos, very informative and very concise. And if you can get to a webinar or a workshop, it's well worth the effort. And I think we'll leave it there. Have you got any last words, Bryant?
No, it's fun to chat with you, and I'm hoping we can do a few more. I got a few ideas on some other stuff we could talk about.
There you go. Yeah, there's always fun to talk, and we have some laughs while we're doing it. So why don't we wrap it up there?
All right. Sounds good, Sal.
Great talking to you, Bryant.
Thanks. We'll see you next time.
Take it easy.